because it's hard to define the call of God on your life. It's hard to really to define it. You just know it. You just kind of inwardly know. It's like it's a spiritual connection that you're responding to that you don't necessarily have the words to describe.
Yeah.
Rise up and breathe and try to live again.
Welcome everybody to another episode of the Live Your Purpose podcast. I'm your host, John Morgan Jr. This is your first time joining us at LYP, man. This is a space that we created to have authentic and organic conversations where we can talk to people about what it is they do to live in their purpose and be able to, share their story. This individual that we have with us today, I have been chasing this guy down for a long time. I don't even know where to start, with titles and stuff like that, man. I love this guy. He is he's a Renaissance man for sure. He is a pastor. He is a father, a husband, a business owner, a CEO, a creative. And he is my father-in-law, who I love so much, and I can't wait to give him a kiss on this screen when we done, man. My father-in-law, Pastor Jeffrey Dennis, in the house, man. How are you? Round of applause one time for my guy, man. What's up, man? How are you?
I am doing great, man. It's good to be in the Live Your Purpose studio.
Yeah, for sure, man. I told him, I said, man, welcome to LYP Studios, man. Man, it feels good to have you sitting down here with me, man.
It's good to be here, man. Thanks for the invitation.
No problem. First question, how are you genuinely? Like, how's your heart? How's your spirit? We getting ready to come to the year's getting ready to end, fourth quarter, the seasons are changing.
Right.
What is your feel of just like where you are genuinely today?
Right. Man, that's a crazy question. I'm in a strange place.
Okay.
I would say it's a good place. Things are moving so rapidly in terms of just everything that I'm involved in. And while things are moving rapidly, the creativity is still present in each of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
So things are moving fast, and as they're moving fast, I'm creating.
Yeah.
And at the same time,
Never not creating.
yeah. And at the same time, man, just kind of trying to figure out how to, slow it down a little bit, get some rest.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, where there is movement and creativity, man, there's just a great opportunity to do new things.
Yeah.
And so it's a strange place,
Yeah.
but it's a good place.
How has your relationship with creativity just kind of evolved over the years?
I think, man, it over the years, you just, as you become clear and comfortable with what you were created to do, as you land in different places, there's this space that you get in where it's like you see sometimes what's supposed to happen, and you see your place in it. And not only do you see your place, but you also see the roles and the places of other people. So, you're creating, you become comfortable with it, and you see and you just wait for God to kind of bring it all together and and do your part, to make it happen.
When did it become clear for you, like just as far as just what you're doing today? And I mean, you're doing a lot, and I want to, we're going to kind of peel those layers back and get into it as we continue to talk. But like, when did it just become kind of crystal clear for you to like, okay, this is the path I'm going to go on, and these are the things that I'm going to do, and just continue to walk my steps?
Yeah. Some of it was clear when I was young, in my early 20s, I knew I was supposed to do certain things. But then what I found out, John, was after you move, and as you begin to move and you do different things, you discover that there's opportunity to do so many other things, or even to do some similar things in other spaces. So it became clear to me when I was young, and here's the challenge. Even at where I'm at now in life, it never turns off. It doesn't turn off. You just keep you keep creating, you keep seeing, and I think that's important to embrace that. You know, so I discovered it when I was young.
Yeah. Well, let's go there for a minute. Let's go there for young Jeff Dennis, like, you know, little kid Jeff Dennis, baby Jeff Dennis. Like when you think of your childhood, like what stands out for you when you think about yourself as a young person?
Yeah, yeah. Back in the day, as a child, I was very creative, very much involved in sports. I loved back in those days baseball, loved football, basketball, horseshoes, softball.
Right.
Very athletic early in my life, and I would get together with some of my friends, and I could see that I was pretty creative because I would draw up plays. I would be like, okay, I want you to do this, you do this, I'm going to do this, and here's how it's going to work out.
Yeah.
And so the young Jeff Dennis was really creative, went to church a lot, really loved the Lord, was really trying to, at the same time, trying to really find, you know, really what else I was supposed to do, you know, in terms of academically, relationship wise, and even family wise.
Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool to hear that you talking about, you know, listen, I was drawing up plays, and that was one of the ways it kind of, you know, became clear to you that, you know, you had a creative side, you know, because you were able to kind of direct traffic and tell people where to go and, you know, find their role in these things or whatnot. I think that's really interesting because, yeah, you can find the smallest examples and ways to kind of like bring forth and crystallize, you know, what you're good at, right? And that was a really good example of that.
Yeah, that and see, I understand it now as I look back, because being able to draw up a play simply meant that you could see something from the beginning to the end.
Right.
And
Before anybody else.
yeah, and so now that I look back and I see, you know, how vision works and all that kind of stuff, man, I can see that was a part of who I was even as a young child.
What else stands out to you today in hindsight about things that you did as a child that maybe you got away from as you got older, but it's become clear to you now, like, oh, that was always in me, that was always there, and now, you know, you able to kind of like really stand on it today?
Yeah, just of course church, and as a child, just as I look back, I see how important that was to me, not just because Mama made us go.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to go to church.
Right.
On Sundays, I wanted to go. I wanted to be a part of the music ministry, be a part of church in general. Me and my brothers, we used to play church, and we used to all preach. And we'd take our time at home and preach. So that was a real big part of my life. But just looking back at church and just that whole place that God was and still is in my life, as I look back, I can see how impactful that was.
Yeah, man, you said it one time since we've been speaking, and one thing that I know about your story is that you've always kind of been clear on vision, right? And always kind of been blessed with the ability to be able to see things, you know, before other people, right? Is there a time that you was able to see something as a kid and it's kind of unfolded over the years?
Yeah, when you look back, and when I look back, I think about some of the things that happened, and even as a child, I realized that these kinds of things can happen to other people. And
Expound on that.
yeah, so for instance, my father died at a young age, and when he passed away, I found myself. I was sitting on the steps by myself while everyone else was crying. We actually heard that he had died. on a religious radio program
Wow.
that came on.
Wow.
The guy's name was Eddie Saunders. He said, "So sorry to announce the passing of Arthur Dennis."
Wow.
And so my sister, aunt, all them were over. They were crying. I was sitting on the steps. And then I went up into the room by myself, and I sat there. White T-shirt, white underwear. I remember what I had on.
Yeah.
Everything, man. That's all Grandma bought us for
Right.
Christmas
Right.
back then, man. And so it was interesting that at that age, I could feel and sense that just as that happened, his death, I understood that could happen to someone else. And so I always had this thing of, wondering or feeling or sensing the value of life and also the pain of death and how you could lose someone at any time. Yeah.
Couple questions. Number one, how old were you when your father passed? 7 years old. Who was your father in that community that they would announce his passing on the radio?
Well, see, that
He
was,
had to be somebody of
yeah.
of stature, somebody, that people knew of.
Yeah, my dad, Arthur Dennis, was a quartet singer in Columbus and known throughout the state of Ohio for his singing. He organized and was a part of back then what was called male choruses, just a group of men who sung primarily quartet music, and so he was well known. He had a couple records that he was on back in the day. The 33s and the 45s. I don't know if you know what those
I
are.
have no idea. Zero idea. I'm just listening in nine.
Some of the singers.
Going way over my head now. This
They know what
artist,
I'm
this
talking
singer
about.
lingo. Okay, I got you.
And so he was well known. Eddie Saunders had a gospel radio program. And on that program, he not only played gospel music, but back then, there were no cell phones. Those weren't texting, that kind of thing. So one of the ways that information got out into the community was by way of radio. Newspaper was a big part of it as well. But so the announcing of that on a Sunday morning, early Sunday morning, would have caught the ears and the hearts of people who were on their way to church.
Got it.
And so, so I remember that so clearly. But again, that whole ideal of death and just being gone really impacted me because, again, I understood that it could happen to anybody at any time. And so even as a young child, John, I was trying to figure out, okay, I need to do this. I want to have fun doing this, whether it was playing football in the backyard by myself, because I always thought, well, I need to do it because I could die at any time.
Wow. And that's how you looked at it even at 7 years old.
That's how it impacted me at 7 years old. And I remember it hitting me really hard when I was at school and I started crying as a child in class. And I remember my teacher, this is years ago, Miss Dandridge was her name, coming behind me, putting her hand on my shoulder and asking me, was I all right? And at that time I was wondering, I got in touch with this thought. I was wondering, how is mommy feeling about all this? And this was weeks later. Yeah. So it impacted me quite a bit.
See, even that's fascinating, right? To be a child, you just lost your father, experiencing your own grief, but yet you are considering in the thoughts and feelings of others.
Right.
Right? Like, you said first, this can happen to anybody.
Right.
How's my mother doing?
Right.
And I couldn't even imagine that.
It's hard for me to imagine it, but when I look back and I think about it and I think about how I am, what I do understand is we're all made differently. And so it's clear to me that a part of how I was made and how I am made is I've been one who has been concerned and tried to be in touch with how people are feeling.
I'm sorry. How old was your father?
My father was 47, I think, somewhere in that area.
So I never forget. I was, we always go to breakfast with my father. Me and the kids go to breakfast with my father every Saturday.
I see those pancakes.
You know what I'm saying? We got to get the pancake ritual. And me and my father, we were talking, and we were talking about, just lineage or whatnot. And he was telling me his story. He was telling me about how his father passed when he was a child as well. Right. And I had always remember him saying that, but I was sitting there with Messiah and Sade at the head of the table. And he was like, and he pointed at her, and he was like, my dad died when I was her age.
Right.
And I had never thought about it like that, right? Like I had never thought about the fact of like my father's father still being a man of young age. I think he might have been in his early 40s as well, and leaving behind babies.
Right.
My children's age.
Right.
It put a whole different perspective of just like some of the stuff you talking about. Is just like, the preciousness of life, how that can happen to anybody. And just like, what I would imagine that you had to have missed out on so much with your father not being there.
Yeah. The first thing I think I missed out on was I always wanted to play baseball with my dad. Mm-hmm. And so that alone was something big for me. Mm-hmm. Baseball was real big back in those days. We used to root for the Cincinnati Reds in Columbus.
right there next to Columbus, yeah.
Yeah, back in the day. And then I would miss my father having rehearsal with the 5 singers who were a part of his group, a bass player, guitar player, right there in the living room, in the little small living room of the house. It was crazy, man. These speakers were really huge, and it was 5 men and a bass player, guitar player, and it was so loud. but I missed that. I became accustomed to that sound.
Yeah.
I missed that. But then the bigger thing that I missed too, man, as I got older, was I felt abandoned because I started experiencing things like, man, I wish I had a father to talk to about this. Or I wish my dad was here to watch me do this. And so I went through this thing where I had to get in touch with being angry with God. God, why would you take my father and, leave me in a situation like this? I thought about my mom as I got older. I was like, wow, mama has to take care of all of us by herself. Mm-hmm. There's 7 of us. Mm-hmm. And so all those kinds of things were going through my mind. I was trying to figure it all out, trying to wrestle with where I was. And it wasn't until my adult life, after really going through grief recovery, that I really got in touch with a lot of things connected to that, and how I do believe that what the scripture says about God causing things to work together for our good. So a part of him being gone did not cause me to miss the way that I was supposed to be shaped.
So, you preaching, man. You preaching, man. So yeah, that's good.
I figured that out, and so that didn't mean that I wouldn't process my feelings about it. I had to process my feelings, and again, I learned to do that in my adult life. But I realized also that I am who I was supposed to be, mm-hmm. and who I am supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Even with him passing at an early age, God still made it happen.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. So before that, right? Before getting to the learning how to process your emotions, before and getting to the place of being able to process your grief appropriately, what were you doing with those feelings before then?
Doing what I see the kids do now, just playing.
Just trying to stay busy, just
staying
moving.
Involved in sports.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things really consume my time, and just enjoying life at that age and at that level that I knew it.
Yeah.
But when I calmed down, I would wonder, why so-and-so down the street had his father, and I didn't have mine. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, I can't imagine the impact of that of an entire family, right? What do you remember about that change in the family dynamics of like, pre your father being here into post of him, not being here? What do you remember that how that impacted your family?
I think that there was, I might say, a lack of protection on one hand of the family, and at the same time there was this lack of discipline. It's hard for mama to take care of 7 kids.
Yeah, all by herself. Yeah, for sure.
And so when you're out there, especially my siblings that were a little bit older than me, there was so many different paths being offered to them. I had a couple sisters that were extremely talented musically. One was able to stay in church. The other one got connected outside the church.
Yeah.
So I saw this lack of discipline, this lack of support, and that was kind of hard to deal with because again, just the whole dynamic of mama having to do this herself, it made me realize that that's a very difficult thing to do. That's not to suggest that mothers are not able to do it on their own, because we've got some strong, brilliant women who know how to make that happen. But in our case, with that catching us all by surprise, I just saw that as an area where things kind of got out of control.
Yeah. Yeah, that's deep, man. That's deep. Because like I said, when I look at my babies today, being 4 and 2 years old, and me being 35, and not too far, younger than your father, and closer to my father's father, I'm like, man, that's right around the corner. You know what I'm saying? My kids is young, and I'm not speaking that at all because I want to live as long as I can. But again, just imagine what that would do to a family, something like that. Like you said, that's beautiful that you're able to have the afterthought of in spite of that, you still turned out the way that it was supposed to be. God still had his hand
Right.
in covering over you.
Right, and I think we have to believe that, and I think that we can see that in many other examples in many other people's lives. I think the thought of loss sometimes is connected to failure. Is certainly connected to pain as well, but loss in that case does not necessarily mean you will have to fail. Sometimes it gives motivation in other areas, and it gives room for other people and other things to come in and do what they were created to do.
Yeah. All right, so let's fast forward a little bit. Okay, so you're a kid, like you said, you spoke to it, really, really good in sports. When I first met you, you was real big on telling me about all these sports clips. You would bring out the newspapers and you was talking it, but it checked out. Everybody I talked to said you was really who you said you were in sports, right? And you were a really highly touted athlete. A 3-sport athlete: baseball, football, and basketball.
Yes.
As a young person, you were on your way. You did go to school. You did go to college.
Right.
And then you get called by God
To preach. Yeah.
Tell me about what it's like being in your early 20s
Yeah.
on one path, and then
Right.
you get this calling, and then you shift it completely. And had there ever been any? Did you ever have any inclination prior to that of want to take up preaching?
Yeah, I think early in my life, I remember some of the deacons at the church that I grew up in saying, and even some of the mothers of the church, some of the older respected women, saying, "Oh yeah, well, you're gonna be a preacher. We can see it all over you.
What were you doing that they seen that?
I have no idea. Probably going to church, probably mimicking what I saw. Maybe when I sang as a child, maybe I reminded them of my dad, or when I talked or whatever. They saw something. And I do believe that, some people have that spiritual eye where they can see certain things. I do believe that. So maybe they saw that on me. So I kind of knew at an early age, and I believed that I would be in some kind of ministry, pastoral ministry at some point in my life. But I graduated from high school, and the opportunity to play football was the greatest opportunity extended to me. I was probably best at football, secondarily baseball, and last but not least, basketball. But I had gotten hit so hard playing football that I was like, no way am I going through that.
Right.
And then I remember playing baseball, and the guy throws the ball and hits me while I'm batting.
Right.
And I don't even want to talk about where I got hit at, okay? But I said, I don't even want to do this anymore.
Right.
And so I said, I'm going to try
You
basketball.
was getting the signs along
Yeah,
the way, like,
man.
all right, this ain't gonna be forever.
So, and then the other thing about football was I went up to Ohio State's workout facility one time in the weight room. And I walked in there and I saw how huge all these guys were.
yeah.
I'm like, I'm out of here.
Right. Yeah, okay.
So I said I'll give basketball a shot. So I went to Ohio State in my first year, and I tried out as a walk-on for the basketball team. A guy named Eldon Miller was the coach back then. And so a few of us walked on, and hey, he was so impressed. He's like, okay, we're going to put you on the team. We're going to keep you around. And so I was really excited about that. And I wonder what he may have seen in terms of my playing, because they ran us so hard before they even let us shoot a basketball.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They just kind of just wanted to see.
Right.
What
So it wasn't even so much predicated on skill. I guess it was will.
Yeah, it was Will, and he saw something, man.
Right.
And so then it was shortly after that I experienced, this real inward passion and what I call a call to ministry. So I was living on campus at that time. And so I remember moving off campus and then wanting to go to seminary so I could prepare myself for ministry and for pastoral work. And that was quite strange because I did love basketball as well. And to get away from it and to pursue this was strange to a lot of people who really didn't know me well. But those who knew me were like, oh, I knew it. And I didn't understand back then how to marry the two. I thought I needed to be in seminary and be in a place where I could be prepared to pastor and preach.
So explain this spiritual experience. Like what was what did it look like? What did the calling look like? What do you remember about those moments and feeling led and feeling called?
Yeah, I remember it was a New Year's Eve night. And what's so interesting, John, is my father passed away on New Year's Eve.
Wow.
So it was a New Year's Eve night. And back then, everybody went to, in our circle, went to what we call watch night service.
Yeah.
And started at 10 o'clock in the evening. And it would go until midnight. You'd pray the new year in. And so I was at watch night service, and I really just felt what I categorize and call the presence of God really working on me. I just felt something. And it wasn't something that I necessarily wanted to say yes to. But I just felt this urge to say, you've got to take this next step in ministry. You've got to take this next step and do what you're supposed to do. And I remember just saying, yes, Lord, I'm going to do this. And I remember going up in front of the church and telling the pastor I felt called to preach. I felt called to enter into ministry like that. And I remember him telling everybody. And then 3 months later, I preached my first sermon. But it was quite an experience because, it's hard to define the call of God on your life. It's hard to really to define it. You just know it. You just kind of inwardly know. It's like it's a spiritual connection that you're responding to that you don't necessarily have the words to describe.
Yeah. And you know what I think is what I think is also important about what you said too is that you didn't even want to do it. You didn't even want to receive it.
Right.
One of my guys, Justin Carter, who I had as a guest on the podcast before, he had said something that I thought was profound one time. He said that you know it's your purpose when it almost like annoys you and you run away from it.
Right.
Right. And I kind of hear a little bit of that in what you're saying as well. And do you see it that way as well? Do you see kind of like your calling and your purpose is almost it's something that's calling you, but yet you are running away from it?
Yeah, it's something you can't get away from. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you can't hide, you can't run. You know, you might feel like Jonah in the Bible, trying to run from God, going in a different direction, but you can't escape it. You know what you're supposed to do, and then what even makes it that much more difficult is when you are around people, they see it, they know it. They'll tell you, you're running. You need to stop running. You know what you're supposed to do. You know how that language that we have,
100%.
and other people can see it, and so it's inescapable. It's like you're locked to it. It's a part of who you are, and it's just hard to get away from.
Yeah, that's still again what's standing out to me as I hear you speaking is the youth, right? Like you dealing with these profound like nuances of experiencing God in real time at these young ages,
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's amazing to me when as I hear it again in real time, and that's what's really standing out to me as I hear it. And I'm just so interested to know how a young person handles that and processes that. You know what I'm saying? Like how does a young person, again, I do believe what you're saying of like, you can't run from it when it's on you, but young people aren't always equipped to handle things as big as that. So how does a young person handle a calling over his life, especially you don't even have the support of your father to be able to run it past,
Right.
but I'm sure you got other people in your support system, but how do you able to handle that at that time?
I don't know, man. When I look back, it's by the grace of God, something that God gives to you. But when I look back, man, all of my life, I've been doing ministry type things.
Right.
So we were a friend of mine. We were being interviewed last week in Columbus, and the interview took place on the street that I grew up on, in that neighborhood, in that park, and during that interview, my partner Ed told the story of how I was intervening in the lives of people at a very young age, stopping fights, doing things to avoid fights. He told a story of one time we were playing basketball and we were killing these guys, and these were the neighborhood bullies. We were killing them. Mm-hmm. And I had forgotten about the story, and then when Ed brought it up again, I remembered. He said that I said time out, and I called time out, and I said, Ed, we killing these guys, but if we win, they're gonna kill us. And so I said, man, let's let them win so we can go home.
Right.
Right. And so Ed was bringing up those kinds of things, and just kind of, when I knew people didn't like each other and that kind of stuff, and they were gonna fight, I kind of intervened, and then many of my friendships were with a lot of the guys who were known as fighters and bullies and real strong in the community. Mm-hmm. And it was crazy. They used to listen to me. Many of them were older than I was, but they would listen to me. So when I look back over my life, I can see that I was in those kinds of circles, creating things, creating football games, basketball games, where we could come together and do different things. And then when things got hot, being one that kind of mediated and got the tension down. So I saw myself in some of those roles, and so it looked like maybe some of those things were preparing me for the work of pastoring to do, which is really working with people in a lot of ways, and different kinds of people, and mediating different things, and teaching and all that kind of stuff. So when I look back, I kind of see how things were happening to prepare me for what I was to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, listen, that's who I know you to be, right? That's one of the things that I think that I've always just kind of appreciated about you, as I know your role in ministry, is that you've always infused community and people within your ministry, right? You've always been like crystal clear of like, listen, a way of service and, doing God's work is through helping people. You know what I'm saying? And to me, that is, what the presence of God is all about, right? It's like being able to help people diffuse situations to, so we can see another day, right? That's what I see. You know what I'm saying? That's what I think about when I think of God, and that's why I know you kind of to be today.
Yeah, man, and I guess discovering that's who I am. I was listening to Frankie Beverly, man, and one of
Rest in peace to Frankie
Oh
Beverly, man. Come on, man.
I've been going back listening to his music, man, and he was just so far ahead of his time. And his music, certainly those messages are things that we need to hear today.
Yeah, 100%.
But he talks about the golden time of day.
Yeah.
Okay? And he talks about when you discover who you are. That's the golden time of day. Purpose in life, who you really are. And I guess being comfortable with who I am, discovering who I am, and being comfortable with that brings about a certain amount of peace. In the song he talks, the song is all about a very peaceful moment. When the sun goes down, all that kind of stuff. Just a time of relaxation, a time of peace. It's a space where you want to be in. When you discover your purpose and who you are, then that's a great place to be. And so I had to, when I discovered that, initially that gave me a sense of peace, but it also brought some other things with it as well.
See, and you know what? Again, as I'm cheating a little bit because I got a relationship with you, so I know a little bit of insight, right? But as I'm hearing you speak about your story, and I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about is the covering and the support that you had around you, right? And even though you lost your father at a young age, you had to have had beautiful people around you. Yeah. You had to have had experienced God and these other people around you. And what I know to be true is that you met my lovely mother-in-law as a kid too, right? So like as you are transitioning from athletics to being a pastor, you also are preparing to get married or about to get married as well, and about to transition down here to Akron as well. Like, talk to me a little bit about, especially in hindsight now, right? As being
I gotta stretch out.
Go ahead, do your thing. You want a pillow? Let me get you a pillow. You sure you straight? You can stand up and get your stretch on, man. Go ahead. But talk to me a little bit about like in hindsight, what she meant for you during that specific time of like transitioning from athletics to pastoring, and like and walking into this calling, like what she meant for you early on.
Yeah, well, I think one of the greatest things that blessed me in life is watching my brother Art and his wife now Rita, and some of the things that he shared back then, and just his example of finding someone, committing to them, and staying with them. So that example was important. So in my junior high school years, I was looking for a wife.
It's like, I gotta give my brother God, man. Yeah.
You find somebody young,
right,
you stay with them, and all that kind of stuff, man. But what's really interesting, man, that I don't talk about a lot, is those junior high school years were really rough for me. I think I was on the verge of maybe flunking out of school or dropping out of school, and and that's when I met Angela. I saw her one day in the hallway, and I was walking down the hall. She's on the left hand side, and then Ed and a few other people I went to church with. We were in school together back then as well. And I asked him, did he know her, all that kind of stuff. And so I started liking her back then. And I remember I said that I felt like I was about to drop out of school, flunk out of school. Well, she was a cheerleader. And so the only way for me to see her was to make the basketball team.
Right.
And the only way to make the basketball team
Gotta
is
be
you
in school.
Got to be in school.
Right.
And got to have the grades. So that connection right there really became a motivation for me, because that's really why I went to school.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I was like, I want to go see her. Yeah. Now, I'm not advising anybody who's listening to anybody young who's listening to do that.
Don't find no wife at 11, man.
Yeah. You don't want to do that.
Right.
But yeah, so then just meeting her and feeling like she was the one for me, I would say next to, preaching and all that, once I got into that, she was right up there with it. And then when I recognized just who she was to me, I wanted her more than anything else in life. Now that's crazy. People say you're too young to do that, but when I look back, I know that was true, and that's still true today. That she was what I wanted more than anything in life. And because I think my brother and my cousins put a strong value on finding one woman, choosing that woman, sticking with that woman, and loving that woman. And so having seen that in their lives, I guess that kind of motivated me. But even deeper than that, just I really believe that she was the one for me.
Yeah, they normalize it for you, but you also believed it for yourself too.
Absolutely, yeah.
What was why were you on the verge of dropping out in middle school? Was it the grief that was getting heavy? What was going on?
Yeah, that was just a lot of things going on in the neighborhood. When you're in those teenage years, you're really trying to figure out who you are. Back then, junior high school was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And so I was around some older people and just trying to really figure out what I'm supposed to do and how I was supposed to move and how I was supposed to make it. And, if school was really important.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's real, because I'm big on that, man. I'm big on just like, those early teenage years, young people. I mean, we already know young people are vulnerable as it is, because you're young and you're impressionable and your brain's not fully developed and you are looking for guidance, you're looking for structure. But that time period specifically is like, yeah, you're extremely vulnerable. So I get that 100%. But yeah, talk like, okay, when you are making your transition though into pastoring, what do you remember about those early moments, like those early days of transitioning, and like when you get the call in, because you were in Columbus and you moved down here to Akron? What do you remember about those early days of preaching?
I remembered how grateful I was. Pastor Pounds, Roderick Pounds, had been called to Akron to pastor United Baptist Church.
God, Dad.
Yeah. So we grew up in the same church, and he had me down to preach at his church. And someone from another church who was looking for a pastor heard me preach there. And that's how I got my opportunity here. God navigated all that. And that's why I'll always be indebted to Pastor Pounds for just extending that invitation to do that. But I remember Angela had a really good job. and they were paying for her to go to school at Ohio State. And back then, she was talking about wanting to be an anesthesiologist. And I remember saying to her, "Hey, we just got called to a church in Akron."
We.
And she was like, "Yeah, we." And so I remember just being so excited. There was no way I was going to say no. I never negotiated what I was going to be paid or anything like that. Anything like that. Just was excited about coming. This is God's will. This is what we're supposed to do. We're gonna make the move. And I remember her saying, "Well, why don't you go on down for a few months,
Yeah, I come catch you in a little bit.
and I'll stay here and let's see how things work out." But I remember just the excitement and really grateful, like I said, to Pastor Pounds and to the first church that I pastored. That's where I met some of your family members at Providence Baptist Church. So grateful for those people for giving me the opportunity to be their first pastor. I was 23 years old, so I was still very, very young.
It's the early 80s.
Early 80s, man, my goodness.
What was it like being a young preacher in the early 80s?
For me, that was it. You a preacher, you young, you got your energy, that's what I wanted to do and wanted to be. And so I was like, I'm where I'm supposed to be at. I was in a good place.
Yeah.
I was feeling good, feeling really humble. Like, man, why God? How'd I know I didn't get it on my own. I wasn't that good of a preacher.
What was the philosophy around business and preaching back then? Like, we've seen it kind of evolve over the years. So,
Right.
it's become in some capacity, we understand the business side of churches today. Like, what was it back in that time?
In my context, it was there's nothing bigger than church. So you go and you do the spiritual things that you need to do at church, and you pastor. You be there for people. You're there when they're sick. You marry them. You bury them. You counsel them. And there was nothing bigger than that.
So business, money, none of that ever came into play, period.
No, back then, and it still has been my philosophy on the church side, you just let trustees handle the money. You let people do what they're supposed to do, and you focus on meeting the needs of the people.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I mean, I get it though, especially when you're young. You're just like, man, listen, I got a job. I'm gonna be serving, be helping people. God has put me in this position. I'm there to show up and do that. But I mean, you still got to live, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? You got how you supposed to live off of that.
Right, and so I didn't really focus on that, and I think that as I look back, I wish that I would have focused on that a little bit more, had a little bit more balance with that. I was just so excited to do the work of the Lord. And back in those days, a lot of the older preachers in the context that in my context, were preachers who just taught, you just pastor until you die.
Yeah.
You don't worry about it. God will take care of you.
God'll make a way.
Yeah, he'll make a way out of no way. Don't try to negotiate anything. Just do the work. And that wasn't necessarily the best advice, but that was the philosophy back then.
How has that philosophy helped you and maybe hurt you in ways?
It's helped me in that you get a chance to really develop that approach to how you help. So, for instance, if you have a desire to really help somebody, and your work, your day, is spent on developing strategies and being there for people and seeing the positive results in many cases, it gives you a sense of fulfillment that's just unbelievable. Like to see couples who are on the verge of separating stay together. To see people who were facing complicated situations and who wanted to give up decide to continue on because of how you shared with them and given to them biblical direction from Scripture. To see those kinds of things, to help someone walk through the loss of a family member, and to just to be there with them. It's when you develop that, and it is something that you develop. Wanting to help is one thing, but then developing the skill to know how to help in different areas is something different. Being full time in ministry, giving yourself to that, gives you a chance to develop that. So on that side, you there's a sense of fulfillment. On the other side, I wish there would have been those who have talked to me about investments, health care, insurance, and all that. Those were never the discussions. It was always back in that day, and we're talking 40 something years ago, John. Back in those days, it was the Lord will make a way somehow.
Yeah, so it's not so much of like, all right, I wouldn't have did so much work over here. It's just that I would have added to this a little bit more by kind of delegating to this side over here a little bit more. I wouldn't have took away from the work and the service part. I would have just been a little bit more wiser with some of the, other pieces over here that still could have funded.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So when in our early days, man, when we go to the grocery store, we would buy food. If somebody didn't have food and we didn't have money, we would bring them in to our house and share with them the food that we had in the freezer, in the refrigerator. Not just prepare a meal, but we would give them a portion of what we had to take with them. Now, we would still do that today.
Yeah.
But the focus was on how do you help?
Right.
What can you give? How do you serve? And that was primarily where you put your energy and everything, where you put your focus on. Just try to find ways to help people who are hurting.
How much of that was the philosophy of just what preaching was back then and pastoring, and how much of that was who you were instilled to be in your home?
I think that a lot of that was who I was instilled to be. So I always viewed my mother as a giving person.
Yeah.
And spending a lot of time talking with her and watching her. Giving was something that I'd love to do. And so even to this day, I just love to give.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was a part of who I am, how I was created.
Do you think that's one of those qualities that it's either in you or it's not?
I'm one of those persons who believes that, let's say if it's not in you, it's not a quality that you have. I believe on this whole spiritual side that the Creator can shape us, that God can shape us in such a way that a non-giver or someone who is non-caring can become a giver and can become caring. Mm-hmm. But it takes the help and the power of God to make that happen.
Because that's a lot of work.
And He does that through other people as well.
Right.
But I do believe that change is possible as it relates to that.
Yeah. Man, another thing that I'm interested to hear your breakdown on and your thought process on, because who I know you to be, and one of the things that I connect to you about is like, from a theology perspective, right? You've been able to infuse liberation, within your theology, within your teachings, right? In the way that you preach and speak about the Bible, right? In the context of the Bible. I had never kind of been not from a sermon and scripture standpoint. Now let me be honest on this broadcast, on this podcast too. I'm still not as familiar with my Bible as I probably should be, right? But in just doing a little bit of research and understanding a little bit more, having a little bit of knowledge now, I understand a lot more of just like the historical context of these is black people that we talking about, right? When did you kind of get educated amongst like how you started to view the Bible from a liberation thought standpoint, and like you started to understand like, wait a minute, I have to look at this from this perspective.
Right. It actually started, I was probably 10 years old. My sister Jan, who has now gone on to be with the Lord. We were kids. She was 11, I was 10.
Man, you a real OG, man. When anytime some folks say they went on to be with the Lord, that's some old school
old
stuff.
school,
Yeah, facts.
She's gone on to be with the Lord.
Yeah.
Going
That's
on
how
to be
my
with
granny used to
with
talk.
the ancestors.
Going on to glory. That's what my granny used to say. Yeah.
Yeah, so she told me, man, when we were kids, she said, Jeff, the people in the Bible were black. And she would, she had been talking to a lot of other people, and she loved to read even as a child. So she was reading different things and all that. And so even at an early age, that kind of started shaping how I started thinking about things, because I believed what Jan said. Now Jan was very interesting. She got kicked out of school in junior high school because she didn't believe what they were teaching.
Yeah, Jan said, I ain't going for it.
Back then, she didn't believe that Columbus discovered America. And I never will forget, we were all trying to tell her, yes, he did. Okay.
And Jan over there standing on it like, man, y'all don't know what y'all talk about.
Oh, my goodness, man. And, Jan she had an afro like Angela Davis.
Okay,
Davis.
yeah.
And,
come on, of course I know who Angela Davis is for sure.
Yeah, and so all that kind of stuff, man. And so that kind of shaped me. I'm born on May 19th.
Malcolm X's birthday.
Malcolm X's birthday. So she used to call me El Haj Mohik El Shabazz. She used to say, "You gonna do something for your people." Okay, so just her speaking those things impacted me. But then as I got older, I started looking at things like pictures. I started looking at how people were treated, how black people were treated. We had an incident, many incidents in Columbus, but there was a man that was beaten up really bad by the police. There were all these images of all the people in the Bible who were white. There was the Ten Commandments, which back in that day, they played it once a year.
The movie.
Yeah, the movie. Mm-hmm. Everybody was white. And as I got older, I started thinking about some of that. Everything that was connected to Africa, we were taught was barbaric, was savage, was not good, all that kind of stuff. And so I began to look at the Bible, and I started looking at different places in the Bible, different lands, those kinds of things, and kind of develop a different theology. When I heard about the work of Dr. William Myers in Cleveland, where he talks about black theology and the whole track that he developed for Ashland Seminary that dealt with black theology and with liberation, it was so intriguing to me that it kind of drew me to that program. And I never will forget, a lot of the colleagues that I connected with back then were white. And when I would try to have these conversations with them about that, they really rejected just the whole idea of like, oh, race is not important. And I never will forget saying to one of them, well, if color and race are not important, then why don't you take the picture of white Jesus down and put a picture of black Jesus up in your church and let's see what happens.
Right. And what'd he say?
Oh, man, he didn't say anything.
Right, just turn red.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And so it's so those kinds of things happened. And then when you start studying, you start seeing just oppression in general, whether you call it demonic oppression, you just see it in general. And you see the Christ as someone who liberates. Mm-hmm. And then when you read different things and you look at different interpretations and you look at the work that Christ is going to do, Christ liberates and sets people free and will destroy any system that is oppressive, any system that is anti-God, whether it is religious or financial. He's going to destroy that, which means that people will be liberated and free to live for him. But it is the evil one and evil ones who are interested in oppression. Yeah.
When you do start to kind of dive deep into, seeing theology from that lens, do you start to isolate yourself from everybody else?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who don't like to look at it that way. I think that there are some who approach theology from a prosperity perspective, that it's all about blessings and that I got mine and you have to get yours.
Yeah.
There are some who approach it from the perspective that Christians are not supposed to suffer in any kind of way, or that we don't suffer, and that if we have certain struggles, it's our fault. They are our decisions, and our decisions got us where we are. And so and then when you discuss theology with those who are non-African Americans, then you're talking about two different things. You're looking at the same Bible, but you're talking about two different things. It's hard to have that discussion about just simple things about, are black people cursed? Weren't we all made in the image of God? All those kinds of things. And so it does become a difficult situation as relates to discussing those kinds of things, because that's not where a lot of people are.
Right.
But I think it's a necessary conversation, because people need to know that Christ has come to set them free.
Mm-hmm.
And so that freedom is not just from the penalty of what we call sin. So
How does that change your world, or how does it impact your worldview, and just like, how you view the world, and how you view oppression and view systems of racism? Like, how does the biblical sense and the spiritual sense, the context of it, how does that impact how you view things?
yeah, there are a lot of Christians, black and white, who have studied and who know better, but who will not speak the truth.
Oof.
And that's a hurting thing when you see that. There's no way you can really study the scripture and not know the truth. And I think that the scripture challenges us to stand against things that are wrong, things that are unjust. And there are some things that have happened to us as black people globally, but specifically here in America. And there's some things that are going on right now that I think that the Christian community should be standing together, black and white, saying enough is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see it as much as it needs to be seen.
And is it a fear thing, or is it a philosophy thing? I don't see it that way.
Yeah. So let's say if you're pastoring a particular church and you get up and you start talking about racism and liberation, and that's not what your congregation wants to hear. Or let's say if you are preaching on a specific subject as it relates to those kinds of things, and your ministry balance is one where you not only preach it, but you go and you stand against that issue. You stand with those who are being oppressed or whatever. For a pastor, some churches may vote them out.
Right.
I mean, I think about the maybe some of the white pastors who want to say some things about what's happening politically and what's happening with different people politically and all that. Maybe some of them are afraid to say something for the fear of losing their congregations, but we are challenged as the people of God to speak the truth. And when you look at the prophets of old, they spoke to and against the wrong things that were going on in the nation. They spoke to the kings, they spoke to the rulers, they spoke to the leaders, and they shared with them, and they spoke to the people as well. But they shared with the leaders, you've got to do what is right.
Right.
You've got to do what God requires of you. And that was a message to everybody, including those who were in the key leadership positions.
Yeah, and it's so deep too because right because it's this cliche saying of like in business per se or just even in public forums period you don't speak about religion or politics, right? But when I hear you speak just now, they go both one and the same almost. Like you can't, especially when you're doing it from a truth perspective and you're doing it from a service perspective, right? You cannot speak on either one
Right.
without speaking about the other.
Right. And the prophet Isaiah talks about people who were fasting and involving themselves in religious practices. And the Lord says, wait a minute, this is not acceptable to me. What are you doing to help the poor?
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing to help your family?
Right.
And what the Lord clearly is saying is that it's more than it's more to life than just the religious practices. But there should be this worship, but then there should also be this compassion and this work to help those who are being oppressed, those who are down. And I think that we forget that part of it.
Talk to me about a time where you personally have been challenged in your faith because of some of the stuff that you're talking about today. Because again, man, you still human and you still a black man in America, right? So yeah, talk to me a little bit about that.
I remember when I was encouraging churches, myself and several other pastors, to put their money in one bank so that we could challenge banks to be open to making home ownership loans to black people. Back when we were doing this, the banks in this area, many of them had made very few, some maybe one or two loans.
What year was this?
Oh my goodness, this was back in the late 90s
Okay.
or so. So I remember when we put this business plan together with churches putting their money in one bank, I remember receiving these phone calls from people who were calling me the N-word and who were saying that they were going to kill me. And I remember them putting these little poster-like things that they had made on the church, and all those kinds of things. So I just believe that it was wrong for banks to not make loans to qualified black people.
Right. Simple.
It's simple. Black people were banking, putting their money in the banks, in these same banks. And so I felt like it needed to be challenged, and it needed to be challenged from a business perspective as well as an ethical perspective. So we challenged it theologically, and we also challenged it business-wise. We said, okay, here's what's going into your bank from just these churches alone. And here's, what you could be making off of this money, because we make deposits, banks make money, making money off the deposits. But where's the reinvestment coming? Where's the reinvestment going? Why can't people get home ownership? Credit scores were the same as some of the white counterparts. Incomes were the same, but many blacks were being denied. Mm-hmm. So taking those kinds of stands, I think, is Christian, to stand up for people who are being discriminated against. And the same thing on the mental health side. Just receiving all of those, that criticism and those threats. I remember one time I had gone to school, and someone had called and said, when I had gotten back, I should have done this to your family. I saw them at the mall at such and such a time. Or I know you go to school at a certain time and your family's there alone. Dealing with those kinds of things have been real and have been painful, but they have come as a result of just standing up for the truth.
And so that challenged your faith because harm was being brought to your way for standing up for the truth and standing up for people.
Yeah, I mean, you really, have to look at your faith. Is this what God wants me to do? Or maybe I need to let this go and just move away because I ain't got time for this.
Right.
But there comes a point when you discover who you are and what you're supposed to do. You can't divorce yourself from it. You just do it.
How important has that been? That messaging, like, I can't divorce myself from this. This is bigger than me.
Right.
I have to stand in this no matter what. How important has that been for you and just your life?
Yeah, that's been driving me. What I understand is you can't do everything, but you have to be true to those areas that you feel God has told you, placed in your heart to stand against. If we all come together and we connect with the Creator, I believe all these different areas will be addressed. But as one person, there's only so much you can do. Mm-hmm. So what are those areas that God has put in my heart to stand up and to try to be a part of bringing change? It's bringing change is not a path that is taken with intentionality to bring shame to somebody else. Bringing about change is saying, here is something that may be wrong, that together we can correct and make it better. And so that becomes the driving force. You want to bring about change. You want to see things better, and it really kind of pushes you to the point to where you say, okay, I'll do this if I have to stand alone. It'll just be me and God.
Wow, that's so good. And that's so personally, right? For myself, and I've asked you about this, in recent conversation that you and I have had offline of like, one of the things that I find myself wrestling with, right, is finding myself wanting to provide service in these different areas, right? Ultimately, to be able to feed this one main ecosystem, this one main goal, right? But there's only so much time in the day. I only have so much energy, right? Some things take off faster than others, right? I've been building one thing longer than I've been doing the other. So you can't do everything at once, right? But what you just said was, sometimes you have to be willing to stand alone on something to ultimately see it come to fruition, right? And just kind of see God's, hand kind of just, take hold of it and develop over time. Talk about the feeling of the isolation of that, right? Because I think there's a lot of people who are wrestling with that, the isolating feeling that comes with standing on things that only you can see,
Right.
and you are in your small proximity, your small ecosystem. You are the only one working on them.
Right. Well, I think that you have to be clear, as I was saying earlier, about where the Lord wants you to stand, what He wants you to stand against, what He wants you to stand for. And isolation is a big part of it, because when you take your stand and when you present certain truth, you don't know all of the people that are being impacted by that truth. And I'm talking about being impacted because they know that they're a part of a system that's wrong and they remain silent on it. You don't know the large number of people that you're impacting. So you really don't know who's with you and who's against you. You really don't know. And so you find yourself out here on an island, kind of standing alone, wondering who you could trust, asking God to send you somebody who you can trust, a physical person who you can trust. You ask God to surround you with people that can really help you. And sometimes before God does that, it's just you and God. And the isolation and the loneliness is real. When you do the kind of stuff that we've been talking about today, especially when you talk about wanting to help people and wanting to make a difference and bring about change, there's an island that you are on sometimes where you are just by yourself, and it is not a comfortable place to be. And trying to make it through that is very difficult, because when you take those stands, you're isolated, and while you're isolated, on one hand, you're publicly positioned to be hit by rocks and darts, because everybody is like throwing something at you. So you have to endure. It's not just the isolation of being alone. It is the pain that comes with being hit all the time.
Right.
And what that does to your mind.
Right.
And what that does to your faith. Mm-hmm. And what that does to your drive. Which rock is going to make me quit? Is what is there one? And I think what happens is you discover that you have this resilience and you have this strength that only comes from God. And the words of Paul, although maybe contextually different, mean something to you powerful, in a very powerful way. And that is that his strength is made perfect in my weakness. Because you find yourself weak, vulnerable, but still strengthened by God as you do it.
See, this is why I got him on here, y'all. This is why I've been wanting you to come on here, man, because you talking, man. You talking good. That's you talking, man. I like that. And see what also comes along what also is, I had Pastor Paramore on here a while ago, right? And he talked a lot about, he made mention of it's another, when you are chasing your purpose and your calling and doing God's work, that's isolating in itself, right? But there's this other layer of isolation for pastors, right? You know what I'm saying? The people who are servicing, who doing the work for God on this scale, right? Y'all experiencing isolation at a whole nother level, because not only are you building and you growing, but people are looking to you to be their safe haven to help them through their day-to-day problems too.
Right.
So it's like, where do you catch your breath at?
Right. Yeah, it's when you look back over your life in ministry, you really find yourself saying things like, how did I ever make it through that?
Right.
I can't believe that I have been doing this for all these years,
Right.
carrying this weight, dealing with these challenges, these issues, helping people when I need help, helping people to get to a place where they discover their healing, and I haven't gotten mine yet. Okay. So all of that is so real, and it can be traumatizing when you start going back. That's why a lot of pastors and people in leadership, John, they don't want to go back. They don't want to relive the trauma of what they have been through. They don't want to talk about it many times, because if they started telling some of the stories, you may not even believe it. The stories have been so horrific. The pain has been so great. But somehow when you look back, you're like, man, it was only God who helped me to help that person. And it was only God who lifted me up as I was lifting them up.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that, man, it's funny how strange how God works. You know, you say, well, why didn't God just lift them up? But God might lift you up and use you to lift them up.
Right. Right.
And it's amazing, man, when you look back and you see that that's what's been happening all of your life,
Right.
and you still been able to press on and make it through, and still be in your right mind.
And see, that's so good too, because right, yeah, you hear it all the time. You know, well, how come pastors, how come preachers, how come people, you know, in the church aren't, you know, working on their mental health or getting therapy and whatnot? And you just kind of said it. Listen, if you knew what a lot of people have gone through or what type of weight that they're carrying, you could understand why it would be very painful for somebody to kind of sit in and process those emotions. You know, they just kind of doing their best to show up in the way that God is asking to do, but to kind of sit in the human part of it
Right.
is a whole nother level.
Right. Who wants to go back and relive the pain of people calling saying they're going to kill you?
Yeah, that's very
Calling you
nobody.
N-word.
Yeah, nobody.
Who wants to relive the impact that they may have had on innocent children?
Right.
I remember one time my daughter answered the phone and somebody told her, "We're going to kill your daddy." Okay. Who wants to go back and relive all of that?
Right.
And because as you get older, you put yourself in other people's shoes even more. What kind of impact did that have on her? You know, I remember one of my, I remember Sierra used to come to church, and I'll just say it this way: one of my kids would come to church, and for a while they couldn't enjoy church because they were watching to see who was watching me because of just all that trauma and all those things that were said. You know, I've talked to preachers who have been hit by people, guns have been pulled out on them in terms of church mess. I remember Charles Stanley Andy Stanley talking about his father, Charles Stanley, being hit in a church meeting by a guy. How do you relive all of that, and who wants to go back there?
Right.
So what a lot of
Show
people
up and come help you all the next day. Right.
yeah. So you know, it's really you know, some people don't want to go back and work through it, but I do believe that some of that stuff you do have to work through.
And see, I love this conversation that you having, and I love the way that you are articulating this experience too, because right, you know, that's how I try to view people in leadership, especially people who are showing up to do like God's work in that way. It's people, right? And you know, I try to view them from the lens of like, man, you don't have no idea what these folks carrying. Like, you know, what would it take what is a person carrying that they have to be able to suppress their stuff for a time being to show up for the greater good of other people, right? You know, and I believe that if we were able to look at things from that lens and again put ourselves in people's shoes, you would have a lot more empathy and understanding, and you know, less judgment and less, you know, criticism for individuals. But one of the stuff that you're talking about right now too is ultimately one of the things that I know that kind of helped that went into how you view the putting together the work for creating the mental health agency, create MBHG. Talk a little bit about like, you know, where that came about. You know, you talking about 30 years ago at this point in time, you was looking at doing a mental health agency and doing mental health work way before mental health was what it. I just seen a mental health commercial yesterday and it blew my mind. It was about destigmatizing the stigma, right? And I was one of the first ones. It was cheesy, but still, you've been doing this work for a long period of time. So just talk a little bit about like what went into going into being in that space years and years ago.
Yeah. Well, as I look back, I can clearly see that on a personal level, for years, I realized that I needed help. Help with processing the death of my father, help with processing some other things that I grew up facing. That certainly contributed to it. But even as a pastor, I remember people coming into my office and I would pray with them, realizing that they needed somebody else to continue the conversation. And the somebody who could continue the conversation would probably need to be a person who was skilled in terms of understanding where people were and skilled enough to kind of walk them to a place of healing, a place of safety. Just realizing that. I remember going to school with some single moms that were at the church, and their kids were being tested by the schools, and the diagnoses were wrong. I remember referring someone to a psychologist, to a counseling agency, and when they got in there and started talking about they were depressed but they loved church and when they go, they love church because they feel the presence of God and they feel like they hear God speaking to them when the preaching is going on. And then the therapist wanted to put that person on medication without really understanding the culture of the person. I knew we needed to do something. Okay. So as I look back and I see that my desire as a child was always to help somebody, I can see now how this ideal of mental health and putting something together that would balance, spirituality, mental health under the umbrella of wellness is what people would need. We would need people who would be culturally competent to work with our people, but also people who understood our faith. So faith competency was very important. And then on the pastoral side, we would need somebody who would be competent as relates to understanding pastors and understanding the various things that we go through. So putting that together, John, was difficult because when we first started talking about it, we started talking about maybe 5, 6 years before we even put it together. So that puts this maybe about 35 years ago or a little bit longer. Back then, in our context, psychology and counseling and the Bible didn't go together. So when I first started talking about it, I remember people wanting to put me out the church because they thought that I was a heretic. They thought that I was bringing some kind of demons into the church. I remember one guy saying, anybody who embraces a psychologist or anybody who calls themselves a psychologist and is a Christian is really nothing more than a demon. I remember this being said in church. So it was not easy doing that. And I think even to this day, I still wrestle with some of the people who kind of wrote me off and said I wasn't biblical because I believed in counseling and therapy. They were like, "Oh, don't listen to Dennis. He's a Muslim," because I talked about black things,
Right.
and liberation.
Right.
Or,
African-centered stuff.
Yeah, African-centered stuff, man. Or when I talked about mental health, oh no, he don't believe in the Bible, and all that kind of stuff. And I've always believed that a discipleship initiative and a treatment plan could go hand in hand. I've always believed that.
Expound on that, Root, if you can. Like, just talk about the two.
Yeah. So if you were to take a person who was experiencing anxiety and they were to go to a therapist and they were diagnosed as dealing with anxiety, the therapist would give them a treatment plan on some of the things that they could do. Nowadays, it might be things like take a walk, breathing, prayer, meditation, music. On the theological side, you would talk with them about how they feel, let them talk through where they are, and you might say, okay, here's some things you can meditate on. So meditation is something that's biblical. You could talk with them not only about things like meditation, but you could talk to them about using the Word of God as an affirmation. Okay, you could talk with them about the whole ideal of prayer, since they're spiritual persons. So I think those things can go hand in hand, and you can work together to help a person find the wellness that they need. There are people that may need to be on medication, but everybody doesn't need to be. And I think the skilled therapist can say, okay, let's use this treatment plan. Let's see what the pastor or what the person's faith is teaching them, and how can we bring those things together to bring healing to a person.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. I mean, yeah, I mean, you and see, you doing a really good job articulating it too, because it sounds so simple, right? And it sounds so logical as well. Why wouldn't these things go hand in hand? Why wouldn't why wouldn't the wellness of your mind and your spirit, it go hand in hand with your spirit, and go hand in hand with mind, body, spirit. Why wouldn't those things be aligned with each other? So when you hear people kind of going against them, it's like you just don't get it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I look at the Psalms, and the Psalms are songs. So some people may say, the therapist may say, okay, why don't you try journaling? Maybe the biblical or the theologian may say, well, let's write a song about how you feel. And ways, there are things that you can, these things can work together. I was reading in one of the Psalms where David was asking himself, he says, why am I so sad? Why am I so depressed? Why do I feel the way that I feel? This is what he writes in the Bible. And I interpreted that as saying, when I'm feeling those kind of way, having those kinds of feelings, I'm like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? I seem to be on edge. What's wrong with me? The least little thing is getting on my nerves. What's wrong with me? Why do I feel like giving up? Why am I where I am at today? So David in the Bible may ask that question in a song. I could use that particular psalm and talk to a person who's going through. And so just as David is asking himself the question, which is his self-talk, I can walk somebody through a passage of scripture and maybe do some of the similar things that a therapist might be doing and bring help to a person, help them to get well, and then give them give them a plan of things that they can do to stay well.
How much of that is nuance and context of understanding the scripture, and how much of it is just seeing it as the truth that it is, right? Like, because some people won't interpret it that way.
Right.
So
Right.
how much of it is left to a person's context and being able to interpret it one way, and the other side of it is just, no, this is what it is.
Right. Right. I think there's some pride involved. I think there's some stubbornness involved. And I think that the biggest thing, John, for me is you have to ask yourself the question, do you really want to see this person well? Okay? Do you really want to see them better?
Yeah.
Because if I really want to see you better, then I'm going to do everything I can to find out where
help.
you are.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
I'm going to try to meet you where you
Right.
are.
Right.
I'm not going to just bring to the table, here's your solution,
Yep.
without really understanding where you are.
Yep.
And then the other thing we have to do is make sure you want to get well. Mm-hmm. So when Jesus sees the man who had been sick for 38 years in John chapter 5, Jesus asked the man, do you want to be made whole? Do you want to be made well? And the man began to say things like, I don't have anybody to help me. When I try to get into the water, somebody else gets blessed, because the theory was the first one in the water gets the miracle. So Jesus says, is this something that you want? And then Jesus tells the man, pick up your bed and walk. And the man does it. So the miracle takes place. And there's a blessing when you're in a counseling setting or you're doing something theologically with someone and you see what I call a miracle take place. Someone who was not walking begins to walk.
Yeah.
Someone who was not living at a certain level
Yeah.
begins to now live.
Yeah.
And then Jesus sees the man later on and says to him, I got you well. Now let me show you how to stay well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if that's what we really want to see, and both parties are really interested in seeing that happen, then I think that there's some wonderful things, there's some miracles that can happen in terms of wellness and
I
people
ain't
staying
gonna-
on track.
I ain't gonna lie, man. You making the Bible sound fire. It's like, but I gotta go read this book. Like the way you talking about it, it's like, but I got to go read this book. I got a few more questions before I get you out of here. Talk a little bit about, like, how your spirituality has evolved over the years, right? You're not the same person you were 40 years ago when you first started at 23, right? You know what I'm saying? Like I'm sure you have a different worldview today than what you did back then. Just talk a little bit about, how your spirituality has evolved as well as, you as an individual.
Right. I've come to a place in my life where I'm still excited about learning.
Mm-hmm.
And really, if you feel that you know it all, you're really in bad shape. Okay.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Right.
But if you're at a point where you're still growing and you're learning, you're in a good place.
That's right.
And so I feel like I'm still learning. And one of the things that I realized that I missed early in my life was the fun of having fun. I thought it was all work. So look at the psychological impact that my father's death had on me. My father died when I was young, and people would say to me, your father died as a young man. In his 40s, he was young. That impacted me in such a way that I felt like I needed to work and work hard because at any time I could die.
You could die.
So I'm like, I got to hurry up and get this done. I've got to work and work and work. And I was working so much that work became enjoyable. And I missed the fun of having fun, of putting work in the category of work and saying, I'm going to break away from this now, and I'm just going to go over here and enjoy whatever.
Right.
I missed that. And so one of the things, John, that I'm learning, man, is that when I look back at those kinds of things, I've been really learning and really learning the importance of forgiving yourself. When you look back over your life, especially when you get my age, and you see some of your decisions and some of your mistakes and some of your philosophies, you have to forgive yourself for the things that you thought were right, but now that you're in a different place, you realize that maybe they weren't the wisest things to do, but you thought they were. And so you have to forgive yourself. And that goes with relationships and all that. You've got to learn how to forgive yourself. And if there were people that you hurt, you have to pray that the mercy of God covers them and helps them to make it through the hurt that you were a part of. That's a whole other subject right there. Yeah. But the whole idea of just growing and just realizing different things, and like I mentioned about fun, that's a big thing for me. Just looking at the scripture through different lenses. we were taught in seminary to look at the scripture through Eurocentric lenses, through the lenses of primarily a white male. What I've discovered just through study on my own is passages of scripture that they said meant this didn't necessarily mean this.
Right. Right.
It was broader than that. And so I've learned to kind of look at scripture differently, and that kind of shapes how I move and how I try to bring help or bring light to a situation. So theologically, I'm growing in those areas. I'm still growing.
Man, I one of the things that I've kept in my back pocket, and I've even requoted a few times on this podcast and just in everyday conversation, is one of the jewels that you gave me shortly after Sierra and I got married. Right? We was just talking, and I was like, well, what do you do? When you having a conversation with your wife or whatever, your spouse, and you right and she not, and you laugh. You was like, you have to learn to love her more than you want to be right. I never forgot that, man. Like that was a good one. That was a good one. I kept that one. I'm telling you, I'd have passed the ball on that one. Like, bro, keep this, keep this one. Tell me a few more things of just like, what has helped you maintain a healthy and successful marriage for, almost 50 years.
Wow. I think a real biblical definition of love is what's needed, as opposed to a non-spiritual definition of love, because in order to make it, you can't rely on just the feelings of love.
Right.
You have to broaden your definition of love and look at it from a theological perspective. Love is the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, agape. So, in order for a relationship to work, there has to be sacrifice. Somebody has to sacrifice. Now, here's the amazing thing about this, man. Once a person gets that, then what you discover is that there are seasons in the relationship where one person is carrying more weight than the other. The weight of a relationship is not always equally distributed. Sometimes there are seasons when one person carries more than the other. So if commitment is involved or connected to your definition of love, then you can say that love helps you make it through. Because the love or the commitment says that no matter what happens, we staying in this. We're not separating. We're not going anywhere. We're going to make it through. So I think you have to broaden your definition of love. You have to really understand that there are seasons when one will carry the relationship more than others. Angela and I were just talking about this the other day. Somebody asked us this. The ideal of accepting a person as opposed to trying to change them.
Yeah, Mm-hmm.
Wow. Mm-hmm. When I first got married, I thought she was supposed to be whatever I told her she was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I got that from. Just probably seeing and listening to different things.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is the power of acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean that you don't want to see people be their better them. But what acceptance says is they are who they are. I accept them. I love them. And most of the time when you're with someone, they're on the journey to become better. Mm-hmm. And what acceptance says is I'm going to accept them as to who they are, and I'm going to accept my role to fill in to help them at their pace be who they're supposed to be their better self, their higher self, their greater self. So acceptance is a big piece of that too. And I think one other thing, man, that I'm really just kind of really learning about the relationship piece is just expression. Find different ways to express where you are and how you feel, and the genuine love that you have for each other. Sometimes as you get older, you feel that you lose your value. Sometimes as in a relationship, and especially as men, we aren't able to connect with different ways to express how we feel and how we love. So for me, I started writing music. Writing music became a way for me to express how I feel about life and to express how I feel about her. It becomes a way for me to express how I feel about and how I felt about key things that happened in our relationship. I'm remembering those things. Those things still have value to me. They still motivate me. And expressing to her, writing helped me to express where I want to go with her. So no matter how long you've been married and in a relationship, you still want to show that, hey, here's where we're going. You can't ever stop saying, you can't ever get to a point to where you say it ends right here.
Right.
You got to say, you got to give some guidance and some direction. Here, hey babe, here's where we're going. So I would say just kind of focus in on expression and talk about where you're going. Those are just a few things.
That's good, man. That's good. That's really good. All right, my last question is pastoring, mental health agency, music, you got your hands everywhere, spread out, right? You always hear people talk about balance. How do you have balance? How do you have balance doing this? I don't want to ask you about the balance. I just want to ask you, how do you stay committed to seeing things through that maybe on the outside looking in, they're all different, but they're still connected to your larger goal and your larger purpose? How do you stay diligent in those things?
Right. So for me, John, this sounds kind of crazy, but for me, the symbol, the metaphor, the ritual of libation explains it. So libation, in our context, is when we take some water and take a plant, and we pour water into the plant, and as a symbol of recognizing the Creator, what the Creator has done for us, and just giving that recognition that we are made in the image of the Creator, made with purpose. Then we pour libation, recognizing all of those who the Creator has poured into, and those people have poured into us. So, and we call those names out, as we do. And then we pour libation into a plant, recognizing our responsibility to pour into others. So what I've discovered, for me, this is the key. God gives us vision for a number of different things. He's poured into us. He's poured into others who have poured into us. He's poured into others, poured into us. Now we're pouring into others. The others that we pour into, this is what I've seen, are people that are connected in some kind of way with the vision and the goals and the dreams that God has given to us. And so as we're pouring into them, they're connecting somehow. So let's say you're pouring into someone and they go connect with someone who is in Columbus. You feel like that may be a disconnect. No, that was your responsibility to pour into them for them to discover where they're supposed to be. Somebody else has poured into others who now will see that in order for them to fulfill their vision, they have to be connected to you. I said all that to say the way that I see all of this happening is through relationships, through divine connection of God pouring into people, people pouring into others. And as we pour in to other people as well, there's a connection that takes place.
You know what's so fire about what you just said too? Is that you married my mother and father, I believe, when my mother was pregnant with me.
Right.
And now you sitting here, you know what I'm saying, we talk about this
Yeah.
35 years later, right?
Yeah.
So you talking about literally pouring into two people
Right.
and the baby and you know, and all of that, the inception of all of that was going to be your son-in-law 30 plus years later down the line.
No idea.
No idea.
And for you all to be doing what you're doing
Right.
now, and how it all connects as you're doing media and
Yeah.
I'm doing the things that we do. It may seem like it's a disconnect, but it's all
It's
contiguous.
all connected. Yep.
Yeah, it's connected, and I think that's how it happens. So you have a lot, but you can't do it all by yourself.
For sure.
So it's God, who are you sending
Yep.
to connect?
Yep.
Who have dreams and passion to do this work.
Yep. So good, man. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. All right, my one true last question is, what is your definition of happiness?
Wow. Of happiness. So it's all connected to what I was saying earlier. It's connected to a couple different things. Number one, happiness and joy, they have different meanings, but there's a certain sense of happiness and joy that you get and peace when you know what you're supposed to do. But here's the big thing. This is the big thing for me. Happiness and joy and those kind of things come for me when I see people doing what they're called to do. Mm-hmm. And to be a part of that development and that process is amazing. Okay? And this is what I mean. I get so happy when I see someone who may have come to me years ago and said, "Hey, Pastor, I believe I'm supposed to do this, and I want to do this." And then you speak into their lives and you believe with them. You help them to see what God wants them to do. And they go out and do it, and they do it successfully. There's not a better feeling in the world than to see them doing it, to see them fulfilling their purpose in life, doing the various things that they're called to do. It's amazing. That makes me happy. Pastor Jack over at Prince of Peace, pouring into him, that makes me happy. Mm-hmm. Seeing people in general, doing those kinds of things.
Yeah. Man, beautiful, man. Listen, this has been fantastic. I thank you again for taking the time out and sitting down. It's been, listen, it took 4 or 5 years, but we here, man. So it was good to wait it out, man. I'm glad you sat down with me, man.
Listen, you got to keep this up because I feel like we got to go a little bit further.
Hey, I'm with it, man. I'm with it. I'm with it, man. We might have to make this a regular, thing, man. I'm telling you, people gonna really I know people are gonna get a lot of value, a lot of the things that you shared today. It's been wonderful, man. You did a really good job of just being yourself and being vulnerable and being open and and serving. You know what I'm saying? So I appreciate you for doing that, and I just appreciate you for being yourself. I think the thing that I appreciate about you, the most is it's not even a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. It's just like seeing you be able to pour in all these different entities. What I appreciate you the most, I think, is about you have a spirit of kindness, right? And I know for men, that's not always, the easiest thing to stand in, right? And that's something that I try to stand in, no matter what, man. Have a spirit of kindness, being kind, giving. That is something that takes a lot of courage to do. And it's not always correlated to that, So just being somebody who has a spirit and a heart and a mind and an intention of kindness means a lot to me. So I appreciate you always leading with that. And yeah, man, I thank you for sitting down with us today, man. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you for having me, man.
No problem. Listen, y'all, another episode, LYP. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, Live Your Purpose Media. Check this out. All of our episodes are on audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, all that good stuff. Appreciate y'all as always. Another episode, LYP. Peace.